So
Thanks, Kimberly.
welcome to another conversation hosted by Heart Community Group. And this one, people are coming in their droves now. This one is with the fantastic Joolz Thompson. I think he's an inspiring example, along with a team of volunteers, of somebody actually doing real things on the ground in his community. They've achieved an incredible amount in a very short time. And the lovely thing about Joolz is he also kind of spends a lot of time sharing with others how he did it. So kind of creating a toolkit or for local action planning and so on. So it's all about community climate action. He's also an incubatee, as it's called, from the recently launched Climate Majority Project. And it includes things like neighbourhood planning, community energy generation, food production, water supply, the protection of natural resources, construction, retrofitting, and biodiversity. So fantastic. I'll hand over to you in a moment, Joolz, and the rest of you, if you have questions, leave them until after Joolz has spoken. And then I'll get you to put your hands up or write something in the chat with your question. Hi, Jake. So over to you.
Thanks, Kimberly, and hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Joolz. I've spent the last 25 years in the private sector as a managing director of my own company, and then working as a director of a PLC in the prop tech sector. So I've been telling the wrong stories for the wrong people for the wrong reasons for a number of years. But that's enabled me to garner a skill set and probably a language that's also helped when I've changed direction and moved into the third sector. So I've then, over the last 7 or 8 years, I kind of stepped off that corporate treadmill and gone to work in the third sector. For a think tank called Shared Assets, whose focus is on common good land use with shared benefits, where I developed a mapping application to support community-led development, working with a lot of community groups. And that was to support things like community energy, community land trusts, green spaces growing, spaces to live, work, play, generate, and grow. Most recently, I'm a founder of a community benefits society called iFarm. And we've got 10 acres of land in Norfolk, in a very small village called Blow Norton. And then we've also taken on a local pub, which is the White Horse, which is just across the river in Suffolk. So we're in the nice position of being in a couple of different counties, couple of different parishes, couple of different district councils, which means we can engage across the board through a variety of areas. And being in that situation, you know, our sort of land and pub was envisaged as a climate emergency centre. You know, how do we have a place-based space and venue for gathering to talk about these things, you know? And it's also been the where we've started our community climate action planning, and that includes action on housing, energy, transport, food, and biodiversity. I'm also a parish councillor now, and if you told me a couple of years ago I'd be a parish councillor in the village that I grew up in, I would have laughed at you. But life is strange. So I'm parish councillor, and my day job now is also working for Suffolk's Farming Wildlife Advisory Group. So my day job as a consultant, a business development consultant, is to actually help farmers transition to more sustainable agriculture, and to help our communities connect with their food, but also those who grow their food, because you need a farmer 3 times a day. You know, you might need your doctor, your dentist, or your lawyer once a year, hopefully, something like that. So today I'm probably going to talk a little bit about a story about regeneration. You know, the ethos of our farm started with dreaming of the campfire. About rural regeneration, because we're facing a poly crisis. We've got an epidemic or pandemic, health crises, economic shocks, and then the looming climate crisis, which makes all of those pale into insignificance. So we really started thinking about what does a regenerative approach look like, and how can we mitigate and adapt to the crisis that is here. I mean, it's not coming, it's here. 1.5 degrees is dead, which is a scary thing to take on board, and often that can paralyze, and the fear and anxiety and the grief can stun you into inaction. And I've been through a personal journey of civil disobedience in the eye of the storm with Extinction Rebellion for about 4 years, in the political circle and the operations team. But I've reached a point on my personal journey where I think XR's theory of change is mass civil disobedience, and I think they hit a high tide, and definitely have been successful and done many wonderful things and moved the Overton window. And again, Just Stop Oil, I have to celebrate or salute the bravery of those that are willing to get arrested, but that's probably not for me now. So maybe they're the tip of the spear, but who's going to fill the void that they leave behind? Because while their theory of change, XR's theory of change, is mass civil disobedience, there is no mass at the moment, and I can't see a way of getting it or a strategy coming out of XR for mass. And I think they've recognized that somewhat and pivoted a little bit to relationships over roadblocks, and they're sort of looking to find their way. And much of what you'll hear about today, I've actually proposed within XR in terms of moving to a more community orientated place of action. But it was seen as not being Extinction Rebellion because it didn't involve civil disobedience. So I've moved from a place of complaint to a place of action. And because, if the government turned around tomorrow and said, let's do this, we'd all have to go and do it anyway. So let's just crack on. We don't need to ask permission. There are lots of avenues for action and lots of places, lots of things we can do right now. And the premise of the Climate Majority Project was as a response really to Just Stop Oil. Rupert Reed and I talked about what a more moderate flank might look like and what more moderate action might look like. Because what we know is there are 80% of people don't think the government's doing enough on the climate crisis. And we know that 60% of people want to take action, but don't know what to do. And the prevalent narrative is a Guardian article saying, these are the top 10 things you can do. But that makes us all individuals. It's you can eat less meat, you can fly less, you can recycle, these kind of things, which are great, and we all need to take individual action, and that requires behavioural change for all of us, because change is here, whether or not we like it. It's how we respond to it. But what interests me is what we can do together, what we can do as communities, and what we can do with collective action, because we're stronger together and much more powerful. So what I might do in a moment is play a little video, just a news clip, which is about our farm. So while I tee that up, I'll talk a little bit about community climate action planning. So what we've done where we are is decided it was a good idea to write a plan, because, who's got a plan? I mean, I tell you what, the government don't really have a plan. They're not coming to save us. COP is a failure. Even if we get a different government, we've got a choice between shit or less shit. That's really where we are. And, we don't have a plan. So planning is essential. So we decided, in our area, we would write a plan. And I was a regular attendee at our local parish council as a member of the public, updating on our community benefit society. So I just simply asked our parish council, sort of regularly in the public bit, mentioning the climate crisis. The United Nations have declared code red for humanity. We have a climate emergency, just so those things were entered into the minutes of the meeting. And then ultimately went to our first parish council and said, would you support us in writing a community climate action plan? The parish council doesn't actually need to do anything. We'll deliver the activity, but we'd like your support. And they said yes. And then we took on the local pub, and that was in a different parish. So we approached that parish council and asked the same question. And it's not necessarily all plain sailing, because they ultimately said yes, but it was narrowly passed 3-2 with quite a lot of objections about, oh, if you want to talk about climate, Joolz, you want to go and talk to the Chinese embassy. Now, that's a common objection. And my response to that is their bad behavior doesn't excuse our bad behavior. We're responsible for loads of historic emissions, and we need to set an example here. Equally, our outsourced emissions to China in terms of our consumption aren't recorded anywhere in our plans for net zero. So it's really unfair that we consume all of those goods, but then we put those emissions onto China and then blame them. So we need to just lead the way and take responsibility for our activity. So this is also all about sort of grassroots, ground up action, and how we don't really need to wait for permission to go and do. So I'm just going to play a little news clip, provided it loads. Okay, bear with me just one moment. While that loads, so here we go, and then I'm going to try and share my screen. It's just loading at the moment. So.
Hello, good evening, welcome.
So this is a little bit about the launch of the Climate Majority Project, where I was at a press conference in London, and there was also a film crew at a farm. So share screen. There we go. And hopefully you'll see a YouTube screen. Can you see that okay? Yeah, okay, cool. And hopefully the sound will work. Shout if it doesn't, but I'll play it, and we'll listen to the first 3 minutes of it. So
hello, good evening, welcome to ITV News Anglia.
Coming up on this evening's programme.
A fresh way to fight the climate crisis, the campaign group who say high-profile disruptive protests are alienating support for the cause. It's sorely needed because there are many people that won't sit in the road or go and get arrested, but want to take action.
Hello from David and from me. Welcome to the programme.
First tonight, the climate campaign is looking to win broader support across our region by rejecting the radical methods of protest groups such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion.
Direct action like blocking the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, closing some of our major roads and disrupting fuel supplies has certainly grabbed attention. But could there be another way to bring about change without causing chaos?
Well, that's what a new group called the Climate Majority Project are hoping.
Desperate times, desperate measures. In the past few years, protesters blocked the Grand Prix at Silverstone, glued themselves to the M25 in Hertfordshire and dug up a lawn in Cambridge. Protest groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil believe civil disobedience is the only way to get people listening about the climate crisis. But today, a new movement was launched in London called the Climate Majority Project, a movement for the mainstream based not on disruption, but proactive, concerted effort to get people talking and acting. Among the organisers is Thompson.
XR has raised the alarm. And now, how are the rest of us going to contribute to this action and this journey? It's sorely needed because there are many people that won't sit in the road or go and get arrested, but want to take action. And the Climate Majority Project and Community Climate Action are two avenues and a home for them.
Back in Blow Norton in South Norfolk, Julian has helped set up a community farm where volunteers come together to grow local produce. They all feel strongly that we need to act on climate change now.
We will be facing a war against the climate sooner or later, or we're just going to continue to push the can down the road and until it hits us right in the face and we can't do anything about it because it's just gone too far.
United Nations have issued a code red for humanity over climate change, and it is real, it is coming, and it's already starting to impact us already.
When it comes down to what Extinction Rebellion do and other groups, they're coming from an agenda of complaints. They're complaining to the government and expecting the government to change their behaviour. We don't need to change the government's behaviour. We're quite entitled to make things happen. So we're coming from an agenda of action and solution.
There is a sense of not only that time is running out, but time is up. Only yesterday, a scathing report by the Climate Change Committee warned that the UK is missing its climate targets on nearly every front. Scientists say that it is now too late to keep global warming below the safe limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and emissions are continuing to rise. The Greens became the largest party on East Hertfordshire District Council after the May elections. In Mid-Suffolk, they gained their first majority council. Leader Andy Mellon says this new approach needs to be embraced by all of us.
The crisis is here, and what we've got to do is be responsive to it and be honest about the effects. And I think this new approach, has a lot to sort of commend it. We do need to come together and work together, not just people who are interested in green politics, but everybody needs to be concerned and doing something about the climate.
The government have told us we can be proud of the UK's record as a world leader on net zero. The UK is cutting emissions faster than any other G7 country and attracted billions of investment into renewables, which now account for 40% of our electricity. But many feel not enough is being done. They want governments and companies to not only listen, but act. How they get them to do that splits opinions, but what everyone agrees on is it needs to happen now. Tanya Mercer, ITV News, Blow Norton in Norfolk.
So there we go. There's a little bit about us on the news. And I think there were some very salient points in that news report, and it was very brave of the journalist to say that 1.5 degrees is dead. I think that's the first time I've ever heard that reported on the news. And you would think in this kind of crisis that would be, splashed over the headlines of every paper, and, everyone would be, really reacting to that from a place of urgency, because it's absolutely terrifying what 2 degrees might mean. 1.5 degrees is not a target. It's the safe upper limit that was agreed at the Paris Accord. And when the government says we're cutting emissions faster than any of the G7, and that's just being the best of a bad bunch. That's not a good. It's not indicative of success or safety. So we've got to really think about how we take care of people and the planet into our own hands, because I don't trust the government with my future or the safety of my child or, future generations. So we've got to act, and we've got to act now. And as I say, with civil disobedience, that's great. But, XR specifically don't talk about solutions because they don't want to prefigure a citizens' assembly, and they don't want to get mired in a debate about policy, which is quite understandable and a very sensible thing if you're taking that path. But I tell you what, I do want to get involved in policy and solutions in particular, and actually deliver those solutions on the ground, grassroots, ground up, because Noam Chomsky said, change is rarely a gift from above. It always comes from struggles from below. So we have an opportunity to act and act now and just save as much as we can. Sorry, but one moment. So I do have a sort of presentation, but I feel probably don't need to run through all of that right now. But perhaps I'll just read a couple of quotes from it. So the proceedings for the National Academy of Science said their results confirm that global warming is already on the verge of crossing 1.5 degrees, even if the climate forcing pathway is substantially reduced in the near term. So that's just where we are. That's just the science. And people speak of hope as if it's a delicate, ephemeral thing made of whispers and spiders' webs, and it's not. Hope has dirt on her knuckles, dirt on her face, blood on her knuckles, and the grit of cobblestones in her hair, just as she spat out a tooth as she rises for another go. So
love that quote, Jules. That's brilliant. One of my favourite quotes.
Oh,
But
good.
I think in terms of the time we have here, and I want to make sure there's time for questions.
Sure.
You dive right into what you've actually done.
Okay, great. Okay, cool. So what we've done is we got 10,000 in funding from the National Lottery, because they said and they actually said our bid, our Together for Our Planet bid, was the strongest that they'd received throughout the UK. And they liked it because it was replicable, scalable, and leaves a legacy. And those are really, really important. It's replicable. You can go and do it where you are. It's scalable. Everyone can do it around the UK. And it leaves a legacy, because of writing a plan, and then we're going in, and most importantly, we're going and enacting our plan. So we've held a series of 3 participatory workshops, because it's really important that it's the community's plan, that they've written it, that they take ownership of it. It's their pride in place, and it's their civic duty. So, and I say there because I live in the community, I'm in the community, I live here, I grew up here, but I had to sit on my hands and bite my tongue while they wrote the plan, because I could write it, but if I wrote it, that's just being parachuted in from above. But it's got to come, from those that participated in it. And we did a series of 3 workshops. So first one was stakeholder mapping. So, where we are and who's around us. And I might just quickly share my screen while I'm talking about this, because then you can at least see some of the slides. I won't go into too much detail about with the presentation, but I will just share some pictures. So there we go. That's our stakeholder map. It started off with post-it notes in the pub, and then we left it up for over the weekend. People added to it, and then we drew out our stakeholder map. And then through a series, like I say, a series of workshops, very well attended. I say well attended, we've got about 5% of our population, so that's that's pretty good going. We did our shared values. We took the isms out of it, because I'm a paid up member of the Labour Party, and we're working with Conservatives, so we took the isms out, and we just said, well, what values do we share? And you can see, hopefully see on there, that sharing, wild space, connection, kindness, community, all came up really high. So wild space, and we also had other core values of habitable planet and clean air. And then we mapped out what community resilience and well-being feels like. And then we looked at 5 themes that we were going to work on, and we decided from a selection: transport, energy, food, housing, and biodiversity. And then we went on to develop project plans in each of those themes, using what's called a GROW methodology, which is goal, reality, where we are now, our options, what we could do, and who's going to do it. And that part, the who, was really interesting, because that built capacity in our community, and we got people to lead on all of those working groups. And these are just some examples of what we came up with. So mapping local sites and condition for biodiversity. So we've got a biodiversity audit for one parish. We decided we're going to benchmark our biodiversity and map where we are, and then create a plan to improve that with nature-based recovery, wildlife corridors, wildflowers, tree planting and orchards, and allotments and food growing. We decided to look at retrofitting. How many houses are band D or below where we are? Well, there's 84% where we are, and we've got 20% above average fuel poverty. So how can we fix that? How can we do energy audits, and how can we go about and actually go and deliver? How can we insulate Britain? Now, insulate Britain were right, but they're gluing their hands to the road, whereas we're going to go and insulate homes. So slight difference in terms of the outcome of the same thought process. So we use a variety of software to do that. And what we've discovered, so what we've done is, so we've done stakeholder mapping, what health and well-being feels like, shared values, themes to work on, and projects. So we've come up with a plan, and then we held a people's assembly to ratify that plan. So what are the objections? Are we on the right track? Have we missed anything? Should we continue with this process, or stop and go in a different direction? And I think 99% of people said yes, amazing. One person just said, not quite sure. I think it needs a little bit more work, but it was, you know, we got the plan ratified by the community, and it was participatory and ended in some deliberative democracy. So it was very inclusive, and that process included residents, stakeholders, NGOs, higher education, schools, some of our anchor institutions, and many parish and some district councillors. So it was a really interesting process. The outcome has been really successful in that we were grant funded for 1, we delivered for 3 parishes, and subsequently we've gone from 3 to 9 to 6, 3 to 6 to 9 to 10 parishes. So we now formed a Suffolk Green cluster. We've had our first meeting, we're now having our second, and we've got very much activity in working groups working on all of those areas. And our next meeting is on Thursday, where we would be doing project updates for the leads on all of those areas. So, for instance, our neighbouring parish is led, their chair is a chap called Andy, and he's leading on transport, and he's been looking at electric buses, the final mile, electric bikes, you know, that kind of thing. And Andy is great because he's ex-military, but he's 6'6", grey hair and retired. Now, I'm the child of a hippie, so unlikely bedfellows, but we recognise in each other someone who gets shit done. So we work together like a house on fire. It's brilliant, really good. And not only that, and people like Andrew has taken lead on biodiversity. He's a keen ornithologist, and he's also a parish councillor in the neighbouring village of Hinderclay. We've got our master gardener, Brian, looking at food and food production, because I tell you what, when this bites, we've already seen rationing in shops, you know, with one lettuce head per customer. We've also seen failure in our just-in-time supply systems for food, where we've had shortages of tomatoes. We've seen the price of cauliflower and butter increase by 20% as a direct result of the climate emergency. So food and things like water management are going to be incredibly important. So it's really, really urgent that as communities, we start to ask ourselves the question of where our water and food comes from now, before we're hungry and thirsty, because that's way too late. And in East Anglia, we're one of 2 regions in the country still in drought after winter. You know, so our biggest challenge in terms of our food cultivation is how we irrigate and where our water comes from. So those are the kind of things that we're working on, and again, in Suffolk, we've now got another 13 parishes step forward and want to join and roll out methodology. We've had the Regional Association of Local Councils and National Association join discussions with us to see how we can roll out this methodology. And the National Association has 10,000 town and parish councillors. So we're building on success. We have documented methodology. We have whiteboards, project management tools. We have videos of what our workshops look and feel like, and we'd be delighted to share all of that with anyone here that wants to again start a plan or roll out that kind of methodology where you are. And I will just read out one final quote before I start to answer questions. So hopefully that gives you a flavour. I'm really looking forward to Thursday to do an update on our energy projects, because we've been selected for a Community Energy South Pathways programme. So it's a very formal process. They're helping us identify sites, feasibility studies. There's a £10 million community energy fund just opening from the government. We've identified multiple sites. Our aspiration is to be completely off-grid and net zero in the next decade. Now, that's in line with our county's net zero target of 2030, which is world beating. So we've got these brilliant relationships with our county, our district, and our parish councils. We're working in concert with them as a community to meet their targets. So we're helping. You know, we're coming with solutions. So the doors used to be closed, but they're so open now, and pushing on them and falling into the room. That's kind of the reality. Is councils want help. They need community engagement. They can't do it on them by themselves. So we've got lots of opportunity for renewable energy, which I can go into great detail about. And I'll just read out a quote from the chair of the Norfolk Association of Local Councils, who's a chap called Professor Tim O'Riordan, who's Professor Emeritus in Environmental Science at University of East Anglia. And Tim came to visit us, and again, I did a similar meeting and run through. And after the meeting, he immediately went and wrote a paper for the board of the Norfolk Association of Local Councils and said, there is real scope for Norfolk Association of Local Councils to explore the lessons being learned by community climate action in forms of management, financing of recruitment, and a widespread improvement of local livelihoods. And this should be connected to county-based devolution at an early stage, and recommended that the Association of Local Councils promote our methodology to communities. So we've now got groups springing up all around the country. I spent my summer doing festivals and workshops, Green Gathering and elsewhere, and just doing a community climate action workshop. The workshops that I described were 16 hours over 4 days, and we've condensed that into an hour and done a really fast-paced design charrette at festivals where we do all of those things in an hour, and workshop attendees will walk away with a flavour of what it feels like to go through, and also walk away with a productive outcome, a top-level strategic plan for their area. So I'd like to extend that as an offer to everyone here. If you would like a 1 hour, deep dive, very fast-paced workshop, that's something we can do for you. And then you can, if it's something of interest, something you can take away into your communities to actually start planning, and then most importantly, start enacting your plan. And I'll happily take any questions. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Joolz. Getting lots of rounds of applause there. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. So I've got too many people to show on one screen, but I think Nikki can help me. I think just put your hands up if you have a question and then unmute yourself. And if everybody talks at once, I'll have to adjudicate. But yeah, over to you. Who's got a question? Yes, David, and then Wendy.
Okay, thanks, Joolz. That's incredibly interesting and relevant to where we are. I'm in Salisbury in East Anglia. We've been trying to engage our districts and county councils on their community sustainability strategy.
Oh, we've lost your sound, David.
It all takes so long and nothing much happens in the end.
What's your question?
Yeah, it keeps coming and going, my connection, for some reason.
Yeah.
Is that better?
It is for now. Yeah. What's your question?
Gone again.
No, you're all right.
Well, it's not so much a question. Yes, I would certainly be interested in the work.
In the 1 hour
shop and developing something locally.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Over and above what we're doing.
Yeah, great. I kind of heard a little bit of that. You did break up a little bit, David, but what I thought I heard was that the council are acting really slowly, and I just want to say they do. So don't wait. Let's crack on. We're moving at pace, and we're moving much faster and have a greater ambition than the majority of our councils. Great.
Okay, thank you, David. Wendy, unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks for an amazing, inspiring thing. I've got a question. Listening to what you're saying, we've got quite a lot going in our village. We are 800 homes, predominantly very well off, which is difficult, and quite elderly. But I have now got a councillor who was Conservative, who didn't get in, but who is very keen to help us. And I've been doing transport stuff about getting information from people in the village about car and electric bike share thing. Now, I also, just before I went to another meeting, I went to Frome and I saw the Flat Pack Democracy in action. And I came home and I bought 6 books and I've handed them out to various people. But I accidentally had an individual meeting with this councillor who is so keen to help to prove himself. And I gave him a copy of the book and he went off going, I bet that council does things, because everyone else comes to say no. I'm not quite sure what my question is, but I'm just kind of excited that I would want him to be able to see what's happening at your end and inspire. My difficulty of inspiring an elderly, rather well-off population to do things is quite difficult. Any suggestions? And not being able to get the younger group involved. I mean, everyone is grey-haired and elderly who's doing the stuff?
Sure. So a couple of three really interesting points there. I actually know Flat Pack Democracy and Peter McFadden really well. I've worked with him on a number of things through XR and with deliberative democracy in our political circle. So yeah, a couple of 3 points there. Number one, an aging population in a well-off rural area. Hopton, the village that I'm parish councillor in, I was drafted onto the parish council as the young blood, and I turned 50 in a week. And we have the oldest population of anywhere in the county of Suffolk. So a very similar demographic. And actually, they can be moved to action even though they're well off, because they've all got kids generally and grandkids, and and so that is really important. Yes, with the council and with the community, particularly with councillors, they often don't know their own agency and the power that they actually hold, even at a very, very local level. There's the possibility to borrow up to £500,000, even via very, very small parish council, via municipal borrowing, which is Public Works Loan Board borrowing for green infrastructure development, for housing or for energy. And you can use that as development capital and rinse and repeat. And of course, if we've got 10 parishes, we've suddenly got 5 million. So that is something. And I'd be really happy to have a conversation with him, because also it's risky and it's lonely. So by gathering together, by grouping and having a community, and also having the mandate that a community plan gives you as a councillor. Well, I tell you what, we've got a plan, our community wrote it. It's my responsibility as their representative to now help them deliver it. So it becomes less lonely. So that's really important. And then in terms of a younger population, again, we have that kind of, there's a lot of apathy. There is a lack of agency, a lack of understanding that it's too big. What can I do? What can I do? Said 7 billion people. And
brilliant.
What I've discovered through having the pub, we've got a house band called Gorilla Glue that play on an open mic night, and they're a bunch of young lads in their 20s, early 20s, and outside over a pint, I've been describing to them the work I do at the parish council, and they're fascinated, and they're like, really? What, you mean you can get a rural exception site for social housing, and I could maybe have a house, because I live with my mum and I can't afford a house. Oh, what, really? You mean, you mean we can install some renewable energy, and actually the profit from that will go back into the community and maybe support some of the stuff we do at the pub. And all of a sudden there's this brightness in their eyes, and I'm this close to convincing them to come to a parish meeting, as members of the public. And all of a sudden they're understanding that democracy is a participatory sport, not a spectator sport.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Nigel.
Hi, thanks. What brilliant talk. Thanks so much, Jules. And I'm just so inspired, and I'm trying to shake off my jadedness because I think many of us have probably been through some of these sort of ventures in the past, and just things have petered out. I mean, I was involved in the transition movement over a decade ago, and some great stuff being done, but we just couldn't. And again, it goes back to what I think Wendy said about the age group of the people involved, and how do you get younger people interested. I think what you're talking about there, talking in the pubs with young people, absolutely brilliant. And I think all councillors ought to be doing that. I was a councillor, and probably didn't do that enough. So yeah, I think my question, which was really, how do we spread that demographic, you kind of already answered. I think the other question I had was how have you found it best to engage with councils? So our council here has just changed colour. It wants to do the right thing on climate. It's got a climate group on the council, which previously was controlled by the Blue Bunch, and they didn't really do very much. But it is, as you said, incredibly slow. I mean, I was listening to all the things you went through in the pub with your post-it notes, and I think I've seen in their meetings they've done all of those things, but it's only been talking amongst themselves and not really with the community. So how have you got is the only way to break that by starting something in the community, or are there ways to try to short circuit that and do both at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's going to take us all, and it will take all of us. So we definitely work in conjunction with our parish, district, and county councils, but they can be horrendously slow. The post-it note exercise, interesting one, because I got some feedback from one of our farmers, Jim, and he said, terribly sorry I left halfway through, but that was fucking boring. He said, when do we get to the action?
Yeah.
And I think that's everyone's experience generally of this post-it note process is great, but what happens after is the most important thing in the delivery. So first of all, just again, I'll touch on engagement with young people. So we've actually got a really keen student group working in our core community climate action team, which are recent graduates, you know, from environmental science, students in masters in behavioural change, and philosophy and economics and humanities. And actually we've got a 15-year-old GCSE student. They're super keen, so they're sort of one of our working groups. We're also working with our local higher education, so West Suffolk College and their green skills team, and that's to train our young people to retrofit homes or work in renewable energy, so actually create jobs for them. So that's a really good method of engagement. In terms of working with councils, it's mostly a case of looking at what their targets and their declarations are, and us working in support of their policy. So it's very difficult for them to say no. And they can't pass laws and they have no money. And they can't do it on their own. They have to have engagement from the community, because that's your anchor institutions, your hospitals, schools, universities, public sector organizations, where they have some influence. But then there's a huge amount of private sector businesses in the community. So the council itself can't deliver that. They can nudge and they can ask and they request, but they cannot deliver it. So that's us, you know, that's everybody. So most councils are desperate for community action. And we're taking some of their pain away, or much of their pain away, by saying, I tell you what, we're going to do this. We're just going to crack on, and we'd love your support. And generally, they're very supportive. But we can move at speed, and we have greater freedom of movement often than the councils themselves. And also as communities, if we move and show an evidence base and a need and an appetite, that makes it really easy for them from a political perspective, and very hard not to move in concert with the community, also from a political perspective, because there is so much political pressure on a local level. You saw in our news report, and I think it was one of your district councils as well. We've now got a majority controlled Green Council, the first district council, the first in the UK. Our district council has a Labour leader for a progressive coalition of Greens, Independents, and Labour in an area that's blue through and through. So our Conservatives politically are terrified of the green agenda, so they're much more likely to act. And if the evidence is from the community, then you know that helps as well.
Yeah, right, thanks so much. I've got to go in a moment, because I'm actually going. I've just engaged myself on going back to school to learn more about this stuff. So I've got a lecture on green ecology in just a few minutes. So
great, well, enjoy.
Lovely to meet you, and definitely interested in the workshops.
Great.
Thanks for coming. And we've got loads of questions, and I'm very conscious of the time. Can I ask, when you unmute yourself, we're going to go to Ro, and then Sonia, and then Jake. Can you make it as succinct as possible, please? Ro.
Hi there, can everyone hear me okay with this? It's a new headphone set. Yeah, brilliant. Joolz, thank you very much. My question is really about the level of education that you've come across, like, because if we're working at a community level, as far as I can see, like if it's based on the media, there's still a huge gap in people's levels of understanding of the actual climate mechanisms. So people might come from a soundbite perspective, or they might come from another perspective, or they might just be wrong, you know, misinformed. And what I'm asking is whether you think, from your experience, there's still a need for really clear education about the processes, which are actually the drivers for why we need to do this action. in order to facilitate wise action and to facilitate dialogue? Because it can easily go astray if someone is misinformed.
Yes, absolutely. There is a massive lack of understanding of the climate and ecological emergency, and in particular the science, and quite where we are in terms of urgency and crisis, which is scary in and of itself. Throughout the process, the participatory process, invariably there is a process of education. However, we tend to find our audience are the 5% of people that are already engaged, and really at this stage, that's all we need. 5% of the 5% is enough to write a plan and for it to carry weight. And there is a thing called the diffusion of innovation bell curve, which goes like that, which is product adoption, which is the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. Now, we're not trying to convince the laggards, which are the climate deniers and the people who don't care. We're not even trying to convince the late majority, which is 40-odd% who will follow. What we are trying to do is be the innovators and encourage the early adopters to follow. And that's about 20%. Once you get to 25%, that's a tipping point. The other 75% will just follow. We are also incorporating education from things like Climate Fresk to actually deliver beyond this process to actually educate. But it's really, yes, it's really important.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ro. Sonia.
Hi.
Hi.
This one's probably too long an answer for you to give, but just like a bullet point or something. I live in St Albans and we're doing our local plan at the moment. What do you think would be like a really important thing for me to put in my views for the local plan?
Okay, sure. So this is a local plan for your district council, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. I mean, in a local plan, again, fairly complex answer. Local plans is difficult to influence through a consultation, but they should be writing things in like biodiversity increase, support for renewables in particular, potentially construction materials for housing, and really everything should be considered in light of net gain, biodiversity increase, water management, and I can go on and on. But perhaps, as you say, have a separate conversation about that, and I can give you some heads up. The thing to do probably is start to look at a neighbourhood development plan and talk to your head of strategic planning at your district council. A neighbourhood development plan could take a long time. So perhaps just crack on with your climate plan in your community, which sits alongside that kind of thing. And then you can influence it on a more micro basis in your area. There are things you can look at like rural exception sites for net zero building for housing needs, this kind of thing, which is outside of the local plan and greenfield. But as you say, quite a lot to talk about there. So I hope that's a fairly brief answer of what you might consider.
Thank you, Sonia. And Joolz, is it all right with you if in the follow-up to this I send people your contact details and then they can get in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. Really, really happy to support anyone in this kind of work. And as Kimberly said, it's all about sharing, scaling, and replicating for our respective legacies.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jake.
Have you got any success stories or lessons learned from doing this in urban areas as opposed to rural parishes?
Well, one of our early adopters nationally is in Bromsgrove, which is a larger town. Not a parish per se. I have looked previously at quite significant urban areas like Gateshead, for instance, in the northeast, where we were looking at a 70-acre site and what have you. But really, it's early days, and we've just started where we are. So there are other groups in Islington, central London, and around the country in Bristol and other urban conurbations that are looking at this. And there is parity. I mean, it's much the same, rather, urban or rural, renewable energy, housing, food, water, biodiversity are similar. There's parity between urban areas and rural areas. Obviously slightly different demographics, but I don't expect it to be much different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, Karen, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, very briefly, just wanted to ask, in terms of people's stress levels at the moment, how do you engage with people who are, yeah, kind of really suffering and facing crisis circumstances? And kind of related question, how do you keep that kind of motivation going where you have the ebb and flow in terms of more active engagement, if you like?
So just to clarify, do you mean when you say stressed people, are you talking about like things like the cost of living and economic pressures? Yeah, I mean, that's really difficult, and not least because obviously then you're piling on things like climate anxiety and climate grief. And I've woken up in the middle of the night in tears when I've kind of recognized quite what we've done. It's like, oh my God, what have we done? And you know, personally, I've experienced that as well, being an activist and in Extinction Rebellion. It's kind of like being in the trenches, and it's also being in unsecure employment and unsecure accommodation, and then facing being of no fixed abode. For instance, when I returned from Newcastle after the pandemic to East Anglia, which is my sort of spiritual home, and it is really difficult. But I guess we're coming from a place of support, because our community benefit society is specifically set up to combat social isolation and loneliness. We are cultivating food, nutrient-dense organic food, which goes to co-ops and food banks and charities like Still Good Food to actually support those on a lower income. And the activity that we're looking at in terms of retrofitting and renewable energy generation is designed to decrease the costs in our community. And we have 20% above national average fuel poverty here. So we're not all just a rich area. And in Breckland, actually, they have pretty much zero unemployment, but as a district, they have the lowest average wage and the lowest level of education of anywhere in the country. That really surprises me for rural Norfolk, because I thought that stat would be Manchester or Birmingham or Liverpool or Newcastle or some industrial northern city, but it's not. It's right in the heart of our countryside. So actually, when we're looking at things like final mile transport, how do you get to the bus stop? Our nearest bus stop's 2 miles away. You know, how do we provide food that's on your doorstep that's affordable, and how do we reduce the costs? But I think it's a really important point. There was a rent strike in Germany in 1938, and the black and white picture with the graffiti on the wall in German, and it said first food, then rent. You know, and it's really difficult to have the headspace for any of this if really you've got too much month left at the end of the money and all you're worried about is paying your bills. Again, that's kind of where we are. So it's a really important thing to consider. And so we are working with Norfolk and Waveney Mind in terms of active hope, in terms of holding that climate grief, but also what we're looking at predominantly is systemic change here. So this green infrastructure and community assets are now held in the commons, so they're community owned, democratically controlled, and the revenues go to support our community, as opposed to going to shareholder primacy and being banked offshore by the rich. So that's how we're looking to help resolve, help that cost in terms of that cost of living, is actually returning those benefits and surplus to the community.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Joolz. And just on the green infrastructure, Wendy asked a question in the chat. And I don't know whether you want to, Joolz, just type in the kind of source that she can go to or say it again slowly. She didn't get the actual details of the 500,000 green infrastructure thing. Where does that pot of money come from?
Right, okay, that comes from potentially as a parish council, we can borrow via Public Works Loan Board borrowing. So it's called municipal bonds. And in our neighbouring parish, we've got some 1922 housing that's now listed because of its construction, its clay lump. And the 1922 housing was Homes for Heroes, and it was council housing for soldiers returning from the First World War. And that was funded by Public Works Loan Board borrowing from Thetford Council, as it was 100 years ago. And so there's plenty of historical precedent for that kind of borrowing to meet the needs of a community, pre and post-war borrowing. So it's the same way that government issues money on the open market. It's managed by a government agency, the Public Works Loan Board borrowing, and it's municipal bonds. So they'll put some bonds, low risk, low return, out to the market and borrow from institutional investors and return that cash to the council for spending on whatever that infrastructure needs to be. Now, it needs to be infrastructure. It needs to have a revenue to pay back the capital and the loan. There's other sources of funding as well. So it's a real mix. It's called blended finance. So community shares, other green municipal investment bonds, private sector investment, this kind of thing. So lots of ways you can do it. I can go into loads of detail, but again, I can do it offline or one-to-one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ray, did you have your hand up? Can you unmute? Or type it. No.
Can you unmute?
Have you got me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wondered, Jules, thank you very much, by the way. You've mentioned water management, improving water management. I only have a very vague idea of what that might mean. At the moment, I'm so angry with the water boards, I think it should be going and knocking on their doors and telling them to do their job properly. But can you give me a quick idea of what community improving water management means?
Yes, again. So on our farm, we're off-grid and don't have any mains water. We adjoin a river, the Little Ouse. We're actually at the headwaters, and we're at a place in the Fens where we have the Little Ouse and the Waveney. And the Waveney runs east towards the coast, and the Little Ouse then runs west in towards the country and joins the Great Ouse. So we have a well where we can abstract up to 20,000 litres of water a day without a licence. But we take about 3 at the moment for our food production. So water management where we are is really important. We flood. There's flooding in the Fens and on the river, and sometimes our roads under 4 foot of water, and our fields are covered in floods. So too much water and too little water are the challenges we face. So again, as a farm, we've introduced some water management. So we're digging French drains, ditches, and planting trees and putting a berm in and doing some excavation for ponds, for reed bed filtration, for dew pond, silt pond, which is settlement, and then a deep pond. And we're ensuring that when it does flood, it's managed flooding onto our land up to the berm, which we're keeping wild. And when it floods across the road, it goes into a drain and is filtered. And the reed bed filtration is really important because it takes out nitrogen, phosphates, fertilizers, glyphosate and what have you, before it goes back into the river. So the river quality is really important. What we recognize is while we've got riparian ownership responsibilities for our part of the river, there's very little we can do on our own. We've tried to do citizen science and invertebrate surveys in the river, and we can't because there's 3 foot of silt in the river. So it's pretty dead. And that 3 foot of silt is actually productive topsoil blown off our land or run off into the river. So that's actually our healthy soil that we need to grow food throughout our breadbasket, which is East Anglia, running into the river. Now, this is a common problem with industrial agriculture. So actually, in terms of water management, we need to engage with our farming community and change their practices. I can share some pictures with you where you can see on sandy soil, you've got huge 4 foot trenches created by the impact of the farm machinery. The soil is compacted because of the farming practices. So when it rains, the water just takes all of the nitrogen and the herbicide and pesticide and just goes straight into the river with the soil. Doesn't help the plants, and that's kind of where we are. So we're engaging with a variety of agencies, from the Rivers Trust, from the Farming Wildlife Advisory Group, our local farmers, and our water companies to have these discussions. And actually, if you're going to start something in your communities, there's a lot of people that really care about water quality, rivers. Everyone lives near a river. generally, even in towns. And everyone generally either likes to swim, or it's a really easy story to tell about the quality of our water. We swim in it, we drink it, it rains. You know, our rain's got plastic in now, and we've got plastic in our blood. So, water is a really interesting value proposition where you can go into your community and there will be people that really care about that already, probably clearing up a river. And so that's an interest, you know, that's the starting point. So I hope, you know, again, I can talk about that at length. We've got rainwater harvesting and filtration and this kind of thing on our land now.
Fantastic. Just on that water point, we've got a conversation coming up a little bit later in the autumn with a wonderful woman from DEFRA who is head of drought for the UK. Imagine having that on your job business card. So look out for that. But yeah, we've come to the end. We've run over actually, and I am so grateful and appreciative, Joolz. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for coming. I will send round an email with the details of how you can contact Joolz. And yeah, and I just had a question. Don't answer it, Joolz, which is, when do you sleep exactly?
Yeah, don't worry. I do have some fun on occasion and do get some rest. Can I part with one final quote?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from the head of the Sir James Bevan, who's chief exec of the Environment Agency, and this was a quote about water, and it was about approaching the jaws of death, which is where demand outstrips supply. And when cities hit day zero, and Johannesburg has hit day zero, Chennai has hit day zero, and that's when a city runs out of water. And London was about a week or two away. And so Sir James Bevan said, climate change plus growth is an existential threat to our economy, our environment, our way of life, and our security and our happiness. We can choose to ignore this problem, or we can choose to tackle it. And I'm betting that you're all in this room because you think the second approach is preferable to the first. You know, we can act, and we can act now.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much. Everybody unmute yourself and say goodbye. And do forward this recording on when you get it to everybody else in your network as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many of you, and I look forward to further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joolz.